From one crisis to another crisis to another crisis, the global economy is cracking. But don't worry. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, along with the IMF, they're going to show you how we're going to come up with a new world order coming up. The debt-driven economy, in that, the interest rates are the key. And that's the only tool that central bankers really have. They always talk about all their tools. The one that they really have are interest rates. Because if they want to stimulate, they lower interest rates. If they want to cool it down, they raise interest rates. Is it going to work this time? This is a different kind of recession that we're going into. I think we go into hyperinflation. And the world, and we've been talking about this too, that the world is getting tired of the US dollars being the world reserve currency and the US having all of that power over SWIFT. So they don't like what you're doing, boom, they cut you off. Imagine if we're in an all digital world and you got a smart house and you got a smart car and you got all these smart things that can be controlled remotely. And they don't like what you say, they don't like what you do, boom, they just cut you off. You better have something that's outside of the system, physical in your possession. Because if you don't hold it, you don't own it. And I don't care what anybody says. It's just a fact. And we've seen it time and time and time again. By no coincidence, the same central banks that are bypassing the dollar financing system, so SWIFT, have bought the most gold over the past 20 years, according to the World Gold Council. Russia, China, Turkey, India, Kazakhstan, and Saudi Arabia. I think that's pretty darn interesting, don't you? Because to the extent that long-term imbalances emerge in trade, central banks can settle up by transferring gold. Shocker. This is why it's the safest thing. It does not take any government to say this is money or this is not money. It has been money for thousands and thousands of years. Unlike currencies and debt, which are claims on foreign governments or institutions, gold kept at home is not subject to political manipulation. So yeah, Russia lost all the reserves that were outside of its borders, inside of enemy territory. But what they kept at home, they can still use to buy the goods and services they need from other countries. That's true for individuals too. Gold and silver kept at home run no counterparty risk, and it's real money. And this is what you need. This is what we all need, because it is indeed the ultimate safe haven asset. They could grow those balance sheets. Interest rates were also up a lot higher, and they were able to pull them down. Well, at least in 2008. They've been anchored near zero since then. So this time they don't really have the balance sheet. I mean, yeah, they can grow more debt until they can't. But there's a little problem with that because the markets have to accept it. And so now, Fed President Bullard came out and says 75 basis point hike could be an option if needed. That's garbage, because even if they raise it a half, which they call huge, 75 basis points would be tremendous, it's only so they can lower them again. This is the new dot plot. Take a look at this. I think this is really interesting and very telling. Okay, so they're going to raise the rates up to about 2.5%. This is what they anticipate. 2.5% for over this year, between now and by 2023. And then they're not going to do anything. They're just going to keep them there for a year, and then they're going to drop them. Well, guess what? Into every crisis up until this point, up until 2008, they have had to lower rates 5.5%, 5.75% in order to stimulate the buying. But now, since inflation has reared its ugly head, Well, they don't want to stimulate the buying because that will make the inflation run hotter. Now, can you see the problem? They're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. You better be in safety. This is my safety net. This is my safety net. That's where you want to be. The safest thing that you can do, because this is not going to be a pretty storm. Well, let's just take a look at Janet Yellen challenges China in a moment for choosing on the world order. So China has a choice. They can either back Russia or they can back the US. So sides are definitely being developed either way. But this is the approach that she says we should take. Number one, we should modernize the approach to trade integration where supply chains are made up of trusted countries. Oh, so if you play the game the way we want you to play it, then you're in, and if you don't, then you're out. And I think that was pretty apparent with what has been going on in the world right now, frankly. They want to revamp the governance of the IMF to reflect their underlying principles and objectives. Of course, that's all really rather subjective, isn't it? But again, you either play our way or it's the highway. I love this. I don't really love this, but I'm just saying. So the war risked reversing the economic recovery that was based on flipping debt from pandemic. And the IMF, who also came out today and lowered the global economic recovery and what they thought the global GDP would do. We'll talk about that in a minute. But central banks urged to act decisively to tame faster inflation. Economic outlook has worsened for 3 quarters. 75% of the countries, the economic outlook has worsened. This fragmentation, this is a key line here. This fragmentation of global governments is perhaps the most serious challenge to the rules-based framework that has governed international economic relations for more than 75 years. Let me just quickly go back to that. What did Janet Yellen say? Well, let's see. We have to revamp the governance of the IMF to reflect the underlying principles and objectives. So does that mean that they have not been actually reflecting the underlying objectives? But this fragmentation, because they want a global world. And what's happening right now is de-globalization. And I was there in the 80s when all the talk was about globalization. Well, it benefited the corporations, but that did not fully benefit the individuals, because what happened? All the high-paying jobs, mostly manufacturing, actually, jobs in general, were shipped overseas, right? Now we've got deglobalization where they're trying to bring everything back in because of what's happened with the supply chains. The IMF thoughts absolutely echo Treasury Secretary Yellen. So now you know this is taking on the level of a full-blown campaign because financial stability risks grow. This is a new report from the IMF blog just today, as war complicates the push to contain inflation. I've said this forever. They're between a rock and a hard place because inflation, now they can't hide it like they could before. It's more obvious for people because it's happening more quickly. When it happens slowly, they can get away with it. That's their price stability. You don't know that it's happening, so you don't change your choices in spending.